The state's actually doing relatively well.
Close to 300 people filled the meeting room of the First Presbyterian Church Wednesday to hear Governor Malloy discuss how the state is doing.
In general terms, we have a $20 billion budget. So as you know, that's $20,000 million. We have a revenue shortfall of less than $200 million. So the dire consequences that everybody talks about are actually not in play. And the difference that we have to make in our expenditures is relatively small.
The governor's visit was presented by the Retired Men's Association of Greenwich as part of their speaker series.
It's always good to get a response from the politicians that are responsible for the state and what's going on, and everybody. We have a lot of questions to ask them, which I don't think we're going to get to today, but at least he's made some time out of his busy schedule to be here.
Governor Malloy hit on 3 topics before taking questions from the audience: pension, transportation, and second chance society, spending a majority of his time on transportation.
I laid out in my own mind there's some things that I needed to accomplish in a second term. We needed to tackle the issue of transportation. I wanted to tackle this issue of what I call second chance society, and that is it really smart to be more invested in permanent punishment than permanent reform? And I said to myself that I was going to settle the pension problem, which is this gigantic hangover that the state of Connecticut suffers from, because through most of that 75-year of giving pensions, nobody funded the pensions. It was a pay-as-you-go system, and it was intended to be a pay-as-you-go system for the rest of all time. In the 1970s, they realized that that was a bad idea, so they started talking about it. But in state government, there's a lot of people confused talking about something with actually doing something. We calculated through an independent study that the cost of congestion in Connecticut is about $4.2 billion a year. That the average time lost to congestion, not an accident, not road work, this is simply congestion, averages about 40+ hours per driver in the state of Connecticut. Cost us $97 million in lost productivity every single day. We've come forward with a plan that could spend up to $100 billion over the next 30 years and be paid for over the next 50 years. And why is that number so big? Because we underinvested in transportation for 40 years. Now, I'm in a city or town that experienced what that looks like when the Mayanus Bridge fell down. And I came from a city that was also badly impacted by that, as we all were during those days if you lived in the area. We know what underinvestment looks like.
One of the questions posed to the governor regarded security in the state after the attacks in Paris.
We have great agencies that are applying themselves to that very issue on an ongoing basis, whether it's in New York City or Chicago or on a national basis or even in our state. We know what some of our vulnerable points are. And I think as we redesign things like train stations and highway systems, security is a much higher issue than it's ever been. I mean, people built train stations and bridges and things like that with no mind towards the possibility of terrorism. It is now constantly with us. We require schools to drill. We've increased security. We've done all of those things. You can never do enough to prevent terrorism, but you can promise yourself, we can promise one another that we're not going to change who we are and what we are because terrorism exists.